should we start with?
That is a good question. I think one of the things we could talk about is that the fact that it was so hard to find these books. Because, that makes a point.
Yeah.
You know? Like, they're hard to access. Like, if they were more popular, there would be more copies of them at the library. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, and they should be, because they're really good books, but...
Yeah.
I actually didn't try to look them up at public libraries or anything. So.
Oh, I looked everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were they just not available, or they didn't even have them?
They didn't have them available. They had, like, one copy, and then it was out.
Oh, okay.
And so... I was like, oh, okay, unless I want to drive to, like, some faraway city.
Yeah.
So, thank you for letting me
you're
borrow that.
Yeah, I had to borrow it too. I also tried Barnes & Noble and Village Books, and they, were only available if you requested them.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's interesting.
Like ahead of time?
Mm-hmm. Like, they have to order them in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because, like I was saying, they're really good. I like these books.
Yeah.
And I'm a sucker for good poetry, so.
Yeah. I know, I liked the chapter on poetry in the book that we read about haikus and stuff, how, because I can remember so many haikus that I wrote in, high school and stuff, and, we didn't talk about any other kind of poetry. There was, a unit on poetry for, a day in, 3rd grade or maybe 4th grade, and that's, the last time I talked about poetry. It's funny.
Yeah, I was reading that chapter, and I talked a little about this in my discussion post, but it just automatically reminded me of my sister, because we had this conversation the other day about how much she hates poetry. She's like, I'm never going to use poetry, and I was like, well, you want to be a teacher. You're going to have to.
Does she want to be a teacher?
Yeah, she wants to be an elementary school teacher, and so I just thought that was so funny, that coincidence, and it kind of, made a good point, though, in the chapter when it was talking about how when teachers hate something and they don't want to teach it, they don't have the motivation, then that rubs off on their students. So finding books of poetry that you like the ones that we read, are super important, because then that gets you engaged as a teacher, and it also gets the kids engaged, especially because, these are multicultural books, too, and so more people can identify with them, you know?
I wrote a note in the book as I was reading, because I used to be a math major before I was intended to be a math major, and then I switched over. And so I think about that all the time when teaching kids math. If you say, I know, I hate fractions, but we're just gonna discuss them today, then your students will hate them. Or if they go home and they talk to their parents, and their parents are like, oh my gosh, math is so hard, I can't help you at all. And then they're like, oh my gosh, then math is hard, you know? And same goes for poetry. If you, say you hate something, then the kids are going to hate it.
Yeah. Yeah, the book mentions how most people don't like it just because they don't really understand it or have the knowledge of it. So if you're not exposed to it, of course you're not going to like it as a teacher or as a kid.
Yeah.
But what I talked about in my post is that I'm taking 401, and I feel like we're doing personal narratives right now, and I feel like my writing is really poetic, and when we're allowed to express ourselves in that way, I feel more in tune with myself, and I feel like I'm reading this book called Boy Writers for 401, that's my expert group, and it talks about how boys don't really like to write about their feelings, so then if they're not emotionally connected, it's going to be really hard to write. So I feel like poetry is a really good way to get students into that emotional feeling.
Yeah, and I think part of that is based on cultural stereotypes too, because in Americanized culture, there's this masculinity thing where guys feel like they have to be macho and not express their feelings, and it's that's imposed upon them at such a young age that it's hard for them to be able to get through that unless they have a teacher that says it's okay for you to do this. You know, everyone has feelings, and it's this is a great way to express them. You know?
And I think it's also a two-way street with parents and teachers. Like if you send a student home at the end of the day that they spend with you and their parents are telling them, oh, don't do that, or oh, I don't like that, or even not like expressing it verbally, but like expressing it in some way, then they're not gonna like it either, you know? I think it's so important to like get parents on board with like what you're teaching and be like, please encourage my students when they go home. So
I think that could be like one of our money questions is how do we get parents on the same page when we're teaching them? Because like not every parent is going to be able to come to a parent-teacher conference. Not every parent is going to have the ability to come into class and help out. And so we need to make the classroom accessible for everyone. And that means reaching out to all the parents. And I think it's important like to know the best way to contact them and things like that. But I'd just like to get a better idea of how you build those relationships with the parents so that you can have a successful teaching relationship with your student.
I know with these books, these were actually like, I have a hard time reading poetry just because like I don't think I grew up like being taught how to read it, and so I kind of read them just like normal books where like it's a character and you're just gonna put the voice in the character, and you're kind of making up this story in your head about them. But with like it's poetry, it's like really hard because like it's like them already in the book, and like it's not this like sequential thing of like, oh yeah, this happened, and then like this story. And so it's like always really hard for me to like get into poetry because I'm like I want this story to happen in my head, and it's not really working. And so, but like I feel like with especially the Blacker the Berry, like those illustrations like really helped, and like even though there wasn't like this story, it was like you can connect with the people who were writing the poems.
Totally.
And I really like that about it.
Yeah, I think it's so much different. Like poetry comes across so differently when the poet or the author is there reading it out loud, and you're like, oh, I never would have thought to read it like that. It all makes sense now.
I was supposed to share a poem for my jigsaw, but you guys read chapter 8. Did you read it?
I don't think I did. No.
I chose the butterfly one from the very beginning. So it's a haiku. Take the butterfly, nature works to produce him. Why doesn't he last? And I chose that one because it left me with like a lot of questions. And what I like about haikus is that there are so little words that you have to be really, really careful about what you choose. So every single word has a purpose. And I don't know, when it says, why doesn't he last, it had me thinking of like time and getting older and like what's our purpose in life. And so that's what I thought of when I read that poem.
And like, what did the author mean by that? Like, what were they thinking as they were writing it?
Because with haikus you have sometimes, and it's all up to you.
I think that's great though because then kids can have their own interpretation of the poems and it does get them connecting on that deeper level. And one of the things that's hard about that is then they start asking those questions and it's like, well, I don't really have an answer to that, but
that's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. You can start out with that. Yeah.
I really liked these other like articles that we read, like through Indian Eyes, right? Is that one of the articles? Okay. And then Not for Sport. I really liked those. I thought Not for Sport gave me, I wrote this in my write-up, my thing online. But I think it gave me so many like answers to questions, like when I get in like conversations like that, like I have now like have the language to be like, oh, this is why. Like, you know, when people ask you questions and you're like, I don't have the language for that, but I know that it's not right kind of thing. But like this gave me the language for like working out those conversations with people, you know?
And I read your post, but like I didn't actually read that reading because it wasn't in my thing. So can you like just explain a little bit more as to what it was about?
Yeah, so it was written by a Native American woman who, her daughter wrote her school like a letter about like I don't feel comfortable with like our mascot being like part of my like culture kind of thing because they were I don't know it didn't come out and say exactly what their mascot was but it was something like the Chiefs or the Indians or something like that and so her daughter wrote this letter to her school and it ended up going to court about like them changing the mascot. It didn't say if it passed or anything, but the article went on to say like when someone has a question about something, like about like why not, why can't we use this as our mascot? Then like it gave answers. So like for example, like a common thing that people might say is like, oh, like this is just stupid. Like you're just wanting me to be like politically correct and all this stuff. But like a good way to combat that is she said, okay, by saying that you just want me to be politically correct, you're belittling the like rape and mass genocide of an entire culture. Yeah. And then people shut up real quick, I guess. But anyway, it like gave like ways to combat that or we're just like, we're honoring your culture. You should feel like proud that like your culture has been selected as our mascot. And they're like, okay, well you're using all of these sacred things for not a sacred event, like feathers and headdresses and drums and dances. Those are all sacred. They're not meant to be used for a football game. And then people shut up. I feel like if you have stuff to say back, but
When was that written?
I don't remember. I don't know. But a lot of times I talk with my dad about this because he's really into sports, and he's like a big social justice advocate, but this is the one thing that he's confused about still is like using Indian and Chief as like a mascot, and so I try to explain it to him, but he's like, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't, like it's been that way for so long, it's been the mascot for so long, and now like I feel like if I sent this to him, he would be like, oh, okay, and like he's really accepting of that kind of thing, but I feel like some people who would like get fired up about it, you, like I said, shut them down real quick.
Yeah, I feel like that comes from a place of, I don't know if you guys have, well, one of the articles kind of addressed this, like white guilt and white privilege, because white privilege is not understanding when something is racist because you're not empathizing with the person that it's like basically appropriating. And I think it's really important to draw that distinction between like honoring someone's culture by doing it in a way that is respectful to them, however that may be, you know, because it's different for everyone. But yeah, I thought it was that was a really cool article. I loved reading that, and apparently it was written in 1999, but she wrote the letter in 1991. Yeah, but it is really good to have those like comebacks basically when you're having arguments about that, because I know this came up when we were talking about like the Vikings and how the mascot was like problematic, and I was talking to my family about that, and then we got into the whole like, oh, why do like the Redskins have to change their name and blah blah blah, and I was like, well, that's a good question, but like it's like you said, like I know it's wrong, like I have that gut feeling that it's wrong, and I know that it's like appropriating a culture, and Redskins, like that's a slang term. Yeah, that's a derogatory term, and like the fact that we're making light of that, that says a lot, you know. And I think in the teaching about Native American literature, that part in the other book, he was talking about how there are some ways that you can teach Native American literature, like you can use some of the creation stories and things, but they're not really meant to be like taught outside of the tribe.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, like there's sacred things that they want to preserve within that culture and not necessarily share with everyone.
Right.
So I think drawing that line is really important and asking questions about like what feels right to you, you know.
One of the things that I had this conversation with my boyfriend because I was really excited about it. So we were talking about it, and so some people might not understand, like, why is that sacred? Why is using a drum sacred? Because in our culture, it's not sacred to use a drum or to have a feather, or you know what I mean. So people might be confused about that, and so if you talk to someone who's Christian, there's like, do you guys know what like sacrament is or communion? So like you could bring that up. Like it's not like if you're Christian, you don't go home. So my boyfriend was saying when he went home one day from church, he was like playing pretend as a little kid, and he was like breaking bread and like telling his mom like, "Oh, do you want some sacrament?" And his mom was like, "No, like that's not acceptable. Like we only do that in church on Sundays." And so anyway, that's like a good parallel to like if someone was Christian and they weren't understanding, you could use that example. Like you wouldn't ever do sacrament or communion outside of a church.
Yeah. Fun fact, like that's where the term hocus pocus came from.
Oh really?
Because because in the Catholic Church, when they were saying things in Latin that the people didn't understand because they spoke a different language, obviously later on, and so in Germany and England and things like that, they would say this long thing in Latin when they were doing like it's basically representing like changing the earthly things into the body and blood of Jesus. And there was something that was like misconstrued, or I don't know how it happened, but somebody misheard it, and that's where the term hocus pocus came from, because it's like magic, like that whole thing. Yeah.
Interesting.
Things you know as a pastor's kid. Yeah, but I think that is a good parallel, because like you need to relate these things to in a way that people can understand them, you know, and it's not going to help to, I mean, it's okay to get angry, because it is something that, like, I know I get angry about, but...
It's hard not to get fired up.
Yeah, but it doesn't help in those situations, because you want to get the point across to them, and like, getting mad and, like, yelling at them isn't going to do anything.
It just automatically makes people, like, super
Shut down.
defensive
Yeah.
and shut down. So what did you guys read if you didn't read these articles?
I read, I don't know what chapter it was, I actually didn't look, but it was like on page 175, and it was about like how to teach Native American literature.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so it was like a 4-step plan, and at first I was like, oh my gosh, I'm reading this, it's kind of boring, just because from what I read anyways, it almost seemed like he just taught like high school and like people in prison, so it was like a lot older, and I was like, this doesn't relate to what I'm going to teach about, because like I'm teaching elementary, and so I was like, and it was kind of like whatever, but then as like I kept going through it, it was like actually really interesting, and so it was just, I feel like I had like a little quote at the end where he said like, show respect, walk slowly, and listen to Native people. And I feel like that just kind of encompassed like everything that he was talking about, and like there was all these steps of like how to choose Native American literature, like what to talk about and what not to talk about, because they have those topics where like you don't speak of it, and like like in America it's kind of like, let's talk about everything, you know, but like in those cultures it's like it's not acceptable sometimes to talk about it, so it's like knowing what topics you're not supposed to touch on and being respectful of that. And so I think it's like really important, like when you are teaching about culturally diverse things, like you have to know where their culture is coming from, and like, is it okay to talk about this, and how it's okay to talk about it. And so that was just kind of like the whole thing of what my section was. I don't know if you read the same thing.
We all had to read that.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But how did you guys reach out?
I think I like misread the instructions and I just read everything.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I did that too.
Yeah.
Okay, I was
Everything.
researching
Yeah.
everything.
No,
Okay.
because it says
Oh,
everyone
what
reads
is it?
Seeing Color
Oh.
and Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, which was about white privilege, basically.
Yeah.
And read all the content in the module, which was like the later stuff.
Oh.
But I thought she meant like all of their
I know, me
professional
too.
readings.
Oh.
So I probably did a
Yeah.
lot more than I was supposed to, but I feel like I got a lot out of it,
Yeah.
so that's what really
Okay.
matters, right?
Okay, because it says and read all the content in the module,
Yeah.
so I assumed like, oh, everything.
Yeah, that's what I thought
Oh,
too.
But I
so-
was like, that's weird that she would put that twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know?
Well, I didn't read the first two, so
Yeah, I know.
okay.
I was like, man, we have a lot of reading this week.
Yeah, right. Oops.
It's okay.
Yeah, I thought that article was really slow, and then he even admits it. He's like, you might be impatient by now, because
Yeah.
with my
I know, that was
style.
hilarious.
Yeah, and as soon as he said it, I was like,
Yes.
yes.
I'm like, yes, you are a slow writer.
The part that I liked, though, it was more interesting to get into like the 4 steps, but I liked when he talked about how he had to be a really good listener, and like once everyone was done, then he could talk. And I think that's a really important thing to have as a teacher,
Mhm.
and to pass on to your students, to say like, if someone's talking about something important, you need to listen, and listen actively, walk slowly, and I think that's really important, especially in these cultural readings and if you're teaching such heavy topics like this.
I agree. One of our, I was telling you guys about the class I took last quarter, Bridging Barriers with Minor Youth, and our like class motto was step forward, step back. So like know when like it's your place to speak, and like you should share, but also know when like you should just sit back and listen and be quiet. And that's honestly a really hard skill for me that I have, if you haven't noticed already. I like to talk about everything, and I think honestly that comes from like how I grew up and like the privilege that I have, and just like speaking all the time and knowing that like my opinion is going to be heard all the time. I think that's like a really big privilege that I have, and so I like try and work really hard about like closing my mouth and sitting back and listening and giving other people the chance to speak. But I think that's an important skill to have.
I'm trying to do that right now.
I also really liked in one of the articles how someone, I forget what article it was or something, but they were like, think about all of the negative stereotypes that encompass your culture and ask yourself like how you would feel if that was seen in a children's book or just a book in general. And I started thinking about like the American culture and how negatively stereotyped the American culture is, and like fat and lazy and white and like wealthy. And I was like, if that was like seen in a children's book, I would be so devastated. Or like Wall-E. Have you guys seen that movie, Wall-E? Oh my gosh, it's so good. But it's like basically they like go to this new planet or whatever, and everyone there is fat and lazy and white, and they're all in these chairs that like hover around because they're too lazy to walk. And I'm like, that right there is what, if my culture was like negatively stereotyped in a book, that's what we would look like.
Mm-hmm.
All the characters in Wall-E, and I would be devastated. I'd be like, hey, that's not me. I don't look like that.
We went to Mexico for the ELED program this summer, and I don't know if you felt this way, but me and my roommates felt quite a bit of culture shock a few days in, and there was this moment where we like broke down and had to talk to our teacher because we were like, why do you feel this way? And then she brought up, you guys are American, like people are gonna look at you like this, they're gonna treat you this way, and like to feel all the privilege that I have in Mexico as an American, and just like all that comes with, I was really uncomfortable. So just knowing that I was viewed a certain way, so that was my first bit of like, wow.
That's crazy. Did you feel the same way?
I mean, I don't feel like I got like the cultural shock, but like there was this time where like my roommates who I was like staying with were like white, and like I was a lot tanner in Mexico because like the sun and everything. So like I was like, you could tell I was Hispanic, and there was like no doubt. And so like people always tried to speak to me in Spanish, and I was like, you're looking at the person who knows the least in the group. Like, look at them. Don't even look at me because I'm gonna be like completely not understanding. And so like there was that moment of just like, you're targeting me just because of how I look.
Yeah.
And so that was a big thing. And like I didn't realize how much it affected me until someone like didn't look at me and immediately start talking to me in Spanish. They like looked literally at like everyone, and I was like, oh my gosh, you are not just looking at me. Thank you. And so that was like a big realization.
Yeah, that's good to know. I want to go on the Mexico trip, and I'm like kind of mentally preparing myself for that. I've heard it's like a lot, but
Yeah. Totally.
Maybe we should touch a little bit more on the books that we read.
these ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
What did you guys think of? We can start with that suitcase of seaweed.
Wow, I really enjoyed it.
I'm trying not to talk as much.
I really enjoyed it. I liked how she talked about like her family migrating to the U.S. I like how she talked a lot about her just family in general. Almost every poem, including her mom. I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Or like one member of her family, but that was really cool.
I like how it split up into the different sections and how it like really set up. You could really see our identity forming, and I like that it talked about family a lot. I think Cambodian culture is really different from Chinese and Korean, but still, in a lot of Asian cultures, like the family is just the biggest thing. I live in Linwood, and like all of my family lives next to me, and we don't meet up as often. But when I was a kid, it was seriously like 3 gatherings a week, and it was so fun. But I thought it was really cool to see how much she talked about family in her poems.
I think I misinterpreted the book until I read all of your poems. I had thought there were 3 different authors, like, writing the 3 different sections, and then I read your poems and I was like, it's one author!
Cool.
And then there was like this realization of like how it
different.
like
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I thought it was interesting because I definitely identified with that, like the importance of family for her, because I still am very spoiled in the fact that my entire mom's side of the family lives in this area. Like the furthest away is like Seattle for me, and I'm from Federal Way, and so like I got to grow up surrounded by cousins and aunts and uncles, and I have both sets of grandparents and a great grandma who is 102.
Wow.
And so I have like so many generations of people in my family that I've learned from, and I feel like they really shape me into the person that I am. And I think that's one of the things that we miss out on in American culture because we are so individualistic. We miss out on that bond between individuals and the importance that family has, you know. And I feel like we could probably value that more.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wrote in the post also was, I think, the window. Yeah, because Mira is myself. Okay, so the window part is that I really don't like that I don't know where my family came from. Like, I know that my last name's German, but that's really all I know about myself. And another thing that Joy posted on the post was at the very end, it was like written by Native American, and a lot of people think that they're part of the Cherokee tribe. And like, I am going to come out and say I've been told my whole life that my great-great-grandma was the daughter of the chief of the Cherokee tribe. And then when I read that, I was like, okay, like, I guess maybe I'm not. Like, that was like such a shock to me.
Yeah.
Like people are told that all the time, not just me. And I would like tell people like, oh no, like I'm partly queer. Maybe I'm not. Like
Yeah.
that's so weird. And so anyway, kind of going off of that, I really know nothing about like my culture and where like my family came from, and even when they came to America, I have no idea. None of my grandparents are alive anymore, so I really don't have access to asking them. And I don't know if my parents know really. And I know that I'm German, but like not really. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, that part of the book was like, this woman knows who she is. Like, she totally knows her identity. And, I mean, of course, like, everyone has questions about their identity, but, like, I don't know. It would make me feel better if I knew more about my identity.
I think I mentioned this in my book, but one of the ways that she identifies with her culture is through food, and that's basically the only connection that I have to my Nordic heritage. And I think that's really interesting because if you think about food as like a metaphor, a lot of people associate it with like love and protection because you associate food with like having someone else provide for you and or providing for someone else. So I think that's just a really interesting comparison that I made because I know for me, like whenever I eat like the foods associated with my culture, I feel like more of a connection. Like, oh, like this is what my ancestors ate too. Like they were doing this too. And yeah, I wish I knew more about my background, but I don't know. I pretty much identify as American, so
And for my year, I talked about being Asian American. But this was also my window because I'm only Cambodian American, or maybe like an 8th Chinese or something, but I'm not sure. So we were different in that way, but it was interesting. I really like seeing the different parts and how they're so distinct. But for me, I feel like, in a way, it's hard to keep track. Like, am I doing this because I'm American? Am I doing this because I'm Cambodian? And I wouldn't say that I like experience mixed identity on a daily basis, or maybe it's just something I don't notice because I was born here and it's just something that I've been living with. But when I have these conversations with other people or like other Cambodians, or I'm in the ethnic student center, so the people that I talk to, it's really hard for some people. And I think sometimes just because I'm Asian and I'm here and I don't feel that way all the time, that maybe other people don't, but it's really interesting to see that my own culture, or students from my own culture, are having a really hard time. Or if you go to like the culture shop, have you heard of that? Oh, it's an event. It's an event for other students of other cultures to share like memoirs and spoken word and stuff about just where they come from. It's really cool. Yeah. It's like weird to talk about. Yeah, you should. It's really cool. It's weird to talk about my identity because it's hard to know how I feel about being an Asian in America, or like who I want to be, or sometimes not even fitting into my own culture because I don't know. I wrote about this in my post, but like some people say like, oh, you're whitewashed, or oh, you like this because you're getting white now, or like I was at a concert and this Longstock at Western, and then this girl was like, this is what you like, right? That white shit. And I got so mad, and she I don't want to go on this, but she like is a really big leader in the ethnic student community, and I almost, because she's made some comments to me about that, and I almost sent out a letter to the coordinator for the ESC, and I was like, if your leader is making people of color feel this way, and like if I don't feel accepted in this community, then I don't know, I was so mad. But yeah.
Kind of like sort of ish, kind of going off of that, like of not really being connected to like your heritage and everything. I feel like she was very much like involved in both sides, and like when she was like saying with like her food, like and like one of the quotes was like, you know, you slurp up the food, and the other one was like, nope, you like leave it down, and like I feel like I don't have that at all. It's just like I don't see myself as like, oh gosh, I have to follow like the Hispanic culture, and then like okay, now I have to like follow the American culture. Because like I never had that like back and forth type of feeling, and so that was like very much the window. It is very blended. It's just like it just kind of like interconnects, and like for me, anyways, I almost don't see like the barrier, and so that was just like very interesting. Just like she does have that distinct two sides. But
it just makes it like apparent that everyone has their own experience when they're like discovering their identity. You know, everyone's experience is going to be different. I always, when I want to like think about my identity and my culture, and like, okay, so what does it mean for me to come from like German heritage? 'Cause it's my last name. It's very German, Wetterauer, and I always think about it in such a negative way. Like when you think about Germany, you think about the Holocaust, and I'm always like, okay, well, that's part of my history that I need to swallow. Like, is it really? You know what I mean?
Yeah. We were talking about this actually in my American Cultural Studies class, the 412 seminar, and how there's like as like a white person, you want to identify with your background, but you also have that guilt of like, you know what your ancestors did to people of color.
Right.
Like, they were enslaved by white people and treated like crap by white people. And so, like, I think for me, the thing that I focus on is accepting that, because I feel like that's one of the best things that you can do is just accept that and not excuse it, but understand that it was a different time, and unfortunately, people weren't as aware or as educated as they are now because people just weren't open to identifying with different cultures at that time. And I know that my family came over a pretty a long time after slavery, but I don't know exactly when. And my family was really poor. They were like dirt poor, so I know like they weren't owners of a plantation or anything, but that doesn't mean that they didn't like go with the culture and that they didn't have advantages because they were white, you know. So for me, it's like appreciating the things from the cultures that I come from, while still acknowledging that there are things in like, the history of places that I come from that are problematic, and that we want to work towards, like in this generation of like being more enlightened about multiculturalism. Like we want to work towards fighting those beliefs because there's still people that think that way. As crazy as it seems to us, like. There's still people that think that way. And it was, I thought it was interesting because in the article that was about white privilege, I was like, oh my gosh, I went through the checklist and I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I never... Yes, yeah. I was like, I never realized that that was like a privilege that I had. And so going through that was like kind of a shock to me because I know about my privilege, but like helping me identify all of the things on a daily basis that I am able to do easily and like without judgment because I'm white. Like, how much stuff is that, you know? Yeah, exactly. So I think, oh my gosh, it's so important to point those things out to people. And I know a lot of people, when like I try to talk to them about white privilege, they get really defensive and they're like, white privilege doesn't exist. It's just like, you could say that because you're white and you're privileged, you know? And so like having those things to point out in those arguments, like I feel like a lot of the readings this week gave us that, you know, gave us that material to like be able to point out things that are problematic.
Yeah, what I liked about this week's content is that a lot of the issues in the world, we think that they come from other people, so we're like, what are we going to do to change them? But these readings really help you like look at yourself, and if everyone changed their own self, it would be a lot different. That's really cool.
I wrote this is super corny, but sometimes I like will have these like epiphanies and I'll like write them in my phone, like really quick. So corny. But and so last night I was like getting super pumped because I was watching this like presidential thing for like a presidential candidate that I really like, and I was like, yeah, we're gonna change the world. And then I started thinking about all of the times in my life that I believed that I could never change the world, just like myself. And so I like wrote in my phone, if each of us like believed that we could change the world, we totally could, like, and the world would change so much faster. Such a corny thing to say, but I feel like as teachers and like as like social justice advocates and stuff, like if we truly believe that every day and like pull off of these things that like we're learning about, we can totally like turn this around and change it. So corny, sorry.
No, I think it's great.
I was gonna say something else too. Oh yeah, so I know we've talked about this quote before, but that quote, if we deny our history, then we're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most important things to remember as like going forward, like with cultural studies and stuff. Like you have to take in the good of your culture, but you also have to remember and recognize like the bad that comes along with your culture, because if you don't, then you might just be perpetuating the things that you don't want to.
Yeah.
Talk about the vocabulary.
Yeah. I loved it. I think part of it, for me, was like the illustrations. Oh my gosh, they were gorgeous. And they just went so well with the poetry. And I'm like a very visual person, so being able to like see this person that's being described, like it's so interesting.
Did you guys read this one?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm like, I don't know what anyone read. I think I love this one so very. Just because I've heard people say this to people so much, like, well, you look white, you're not black. And I hate that. And I feel like if like sharing this poem with a kid who identifies as black or whatever is like struggling with that, I think would help them so much. Just like slipping it on their desk one day, or I don't know, like being like, you should read this book. I don't know.
That was actually my window for this book.
Mine too.
Yes, my window for this book. Just because like someone like did the thing to tell her you are not black. And like I've never had to go through that experience where someone like told me, oh, you're not Hispanic, or no, you're not white, or you're not something. And I was just like, I've never had that experience, and so it was very much like people are told that you're not something that you feel strongly about.
Yeah, I remember that too. And just having to feel like validated by the color of your skin. That's one person.
This is kind of random. That just brought up the Rachel Dolezal thing for me, and how she felt like she identified with the culture so much that she like changed her appearance and like basically tricked a bunch of people into believing that she was African American when she wasn't, and like, oh my gosh, white privilege there, you know. And I think it's funny because if you don't appear to be from your culture, that doesn't mean you're not part of that culture. But if you try to change your appearance to try to be a part of another culture that you will never understand because you're an outsider of that culture, like you're never going to fully be able to understand like how the people in that culture were raised, how they feel about things. Like, it's such an ignorant thing to do.
I think that experience lessons that I learned about like social justice and like cultural studies and that kind of thing, because I talked to my boss about that for like 3 hours this summer. Like, how do I feel about this? Like, what should I like? What should I be saying? What should I be thinking about this issue? And like, the best thing I ever learned was sometimes you just have to not have an answer. Like, you have to just feel comfortable with like having questions not answered. And yeah, because the issue of racism and cultural identity and all of this is really created by our society. And what everyone has gone through is what everyone has gone through, but this issue of racism was created by us, and this issue of having a different identity, because we all really come from the same place if you go back far enough.
Yeah, exactly.
And so my boss was like, just have to be comfortable with like being uncomfortable and not having the answers to these questions. And that was like one of the hardest things that I've ever learned, you know? Do you guys remember that? The Rachel Dozal or whatever?
Oh, I'll look up a picture.
It's this woman, I think she's from Spokane actually, and she was born white, but she identified as black, and she, when was this?
Like recently,
when everyone found out that she was actually white. And so this is how she identifies every day, but that's her like years back as white.
So she just pretended?
Yeah.
Or
She basically changed her appearance so that she could feel like she was more part of the African American community.
So she doesn't really have a good relationship with her family right now, and so that's how this all came out. Her parents pulled like out of her, but she was raised in an adopted family. I think she may have been adopted, but maybe she was like born into this family. I'm not really sure, but she had adopted brothers who were all black and like all identified with that. All identified as black and stuff, and so I feel like I think she would tell you that by living with them and by experiencing a lot of what, and by like hearing of their experiences and stuff, then she learned about.
Yeah, it's crazy.
She's like in.
Like, does she like believe that she's black, or is she just like pretend?
I think it's a little bit of both.
She says that she identifies as black, and she would say that that's different than identifying as African American. And so, maybe that would clear things up a little bit. I don't know. It's really confusing.
Yeah, I think she just has like problems with her identity. That's what it seems like to me.
Or I feel like there could be a lot of arguments brought up with that, just because of like transgenders.
That's true.
If they identify as being a male or female when they're not, like they could argue like, oh, but she like believes.
Yeah.
And so that's why I just kind of question that.
One of the things that really made it problematic, though, was that she was, I think, elected to be the president of the Spokane chapter of the NAACP. Yeah, and so she was in a position of power that should have been occupied by a person of color. And
I could be wrong, but I don't think that to be a member of the NAACP you have to be black.
I don't think so, but it's just the fact that she kind of put on this facade and took on that role as president when nobody knew, like, that she had changed her appearance, essentially. You know, it's withholding information. Basically, it's lying to everyone, but it's like withholding that information and not being honest about who you are. And she didn't get elected on the basis of like being white, you know, it would be different if like she had been elected as a white person, but she wasn't. So
What's her name?
Rachel Dolezal. But yeah, anyways, that just reminded me of that. Sorry, tangent. Like, yeah, that is an interesting question though. Like, where do we draw the line about changing appearance? Like, when is it acceptable? You know, because like you were saying, if you identify as a different gender, that's generally accepted by society. Well, the more progressive parts of society. But if you identify as a different race, like, you don't hear about that very often. And it makes me like wonder, like, what causes a person to do that?
And one of the things, I just remember this, one of the things that was for argument was, well, we all really come from Africa, which you could argue.
Anthropologically.
Yes, I guess we do, but anyway, that's why I feel so up in the air and so torn about this, and we just have to be uncomfortable. And really, who am I to tell someone what they can and can't identify as? It's not really up to me.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing. Like, that could be a money question. I know nobody is going to be able to answer that like well, but like, what is it that causes someone to like want to be a part of a different race, or like want to identify as that, or make themselves appear that way? Because if you look at like kids who are transgender, from a very, very early age, like 2 or 3, they identify as being like the opposite gender. Like generally, that's when it happens. And I like, when did this happen for her? You know, like there's a lot of things we don't know. So, I guess like what makes people basically denounce their heritage and want to take on a different heritage, you know, and is that problematic? Any other questions we can think of? Okay.